When a massive blizzard stranded 12 truckers at my failing Roadhouse, I thought I was just providing shelter during a storm. I had no idea my late husband Frank was a legend among drivers, or that one night of kindness would lead to the most incredible display of trucker solidarity I'd ever witnessed. What happened next would save my business and prove that sometimes family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up when the road gets rough. Hi everyone, welcome to Life's Changing Stories. Now let's dive into today's story. The wind howled across the empty parking lot of Frank's Roadhouse like a lonesome trucker's horn echoing through the Tennessee hills. Sarah Mitchell stood behind the counter at 6:30 p.m. on a Tuesday evening in February, counting the day's meager earnings for the third time, hoping the numbers would somehow change. $28.57. Not even enough to cover the electric bill that sat unopened on her desk, let alone make a dent in the mortgage payments that were now 3 months overdue. For 32 years, Frank's Roadhouse had been a beacon along Interstate 75, the kind of place where truckers could count on hot coffee, homemade biscuits, and a warm welcome from Frank Mitchell himself. Frank had been a long-haul driver for 15 years before settling down with Sarah and opening the Roadhouse, and he understood what drivers needed: good food, fair prices, and someone who spoke their language. The Roadhouse had thrived for decades, becoming a mandatory stop for truckers traveling the busy corridor between Louisville and Atlanta. But 3 years ago, everything changed when the Tennessee Department of Transportation completed their Interstate 75 expansion project, rerouting the main traffic flow 6 miles east to accommodate a new industrial complex. What had once been a steady stream of 18-wheelers became a trickle of local traffic and the occasional trucker who remembered the old route. Sarah had watched helplessly as their customer base evaporated, taking with it the financial stability that had sustained them through Frank's sudden heart attack 5 years earlier. The for sale sign in the window had been there for 8 months now, faded and crooked, attracting about as much interest as the empty coffee pot that hadn't been worth brewing since lunch. Sarah's real estate agent had stopped returning her calls 2 months ago, and the bank's foreclosure notice gave her exactly 12 days to either catch up the payments or surrender the keys to the only home and business she'd ever known. Tonight felt like the beginning of the end, and she was preparing to close early when the first set of headlights cut through the swirling snow. Sarah Mitchell was 54 years old and more determined than the Appalachian Mountains that surrounded her small piece of Tennessee. Every morning since Frank's death 5 years ago, despite the mounting bills and dwindling customers, she'd unlock the doors of Frank's Roadhouse at 5 a.m. sharp. She'd brew the first pot of coffee, fire up the grill, and wait for truckers who increasingly never came, holding on to the hope that somehow things would turn around. Sarah had inherited more than just a Roadhouse when Frank passed away. She'd inherited his reputation, his relationships, and his unwavering belief that every trucker deserved a place where they'd be treated like family rather than just another customer. Frank had been a long-haul driver himself before they married, spending 15 years on the road before deciding to settle down and create the kind of establishment he'd always wished existed during his driving days. The Roadhouse itself was a testament to Frank's understanding of what truckers needed. The parking lot could accommodate 24 big rigs, the bathrooms were always clean, and the food was prepared fresh daily using recipes Frank had collected from diners across the country. Most importantly, Frank had installed a CB radio behind the counter and monitored Channel 19, helping drivers navigate weather conditions, locate safe parking, and sometimes just providing a friendly voice during long, lonely nights on the road. Sarah had maintained every tradition Frank established, even though the financial pressure made each day more difficult than the last. She still monitored the CB radio, still prepared meals from scratch, and still treated every customer like they were part of an extended family. But with Interstate 75's traffic pattern changed, family visits had become increasingly rare. The Roadhouse sat at the intersection of Old Highway 25 and what used to be the primary truck route, surrounded by rolling hills and farmland that looked picture-perfect in tourist brochures but offered little economic opportunity for a struggling business. The nearest town was Williamsburg, Kentucky, population 5,200, which meant Sarah's customer base depended entirely on passing traffic that no longer passed by. When the Tennessee Department of Transportation announced their rerouting project, they'd offered business relocation assistance that sounded generous until Sarah discovered the bureaucratic maze required to qualify. The compensation wouldn't have covered moving expenses, let alone re-establishing a customer base in a new location. Frank had built relationships over 3 decades that couldn't be relocated or replaced. The blizzard that changed everything began as light snow around 3 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon in February. Sarah was refilling the coffee station when she noticed the weather radar showing a massive storm system moving through eastern Kentucky and Tennessee. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the wind was picking up enough to rattle the Roadhouse's windows. Around 6:45 p.m., just as Sarah was preparing to close early, due to the worsening conditions, she heard the distinctive sound of air brakes, followed by the rumble of a diesel engine. A Peterbilt 379 pulled into the parking lot, its headlights cutting through the increasingly heavy snow. The driver who entered was a weather-beaten man in his 50s, wearing a worn leather jacket and a trucker's cap. "Evening, ma'am," he said, stomping snow off his boots. "I'm Buck Thompson, and I hate to bother you this close to closing time, but the highway's shut down about 10 miles back. Whiteout conditions." Sarah looked past Buck to see more headlights approaching through the snow. "How bad is it out there?" "Bad enough that they're not letting anybody through until morning, maybe longer," Buck replied. "I've got 11 more drivers behind me, all looking for somewhere to wait this out." Motels in town are full up with folks who got stuck earlier. As if summoned by Buck's words, more truckers began filing through the door, each bringing stories of worsening road conditions and cancelled reservations. Sarah quickly counted 12 drivers total, ranging from a young woman who couldn't have been more than 25 to a grizzled veteran who looked like he'd been driving since the interstate system was built. "I don't have much food left," Sarah admitted, calculating her limited supplies. "And I was about to close, but nobody should be out in this weather." "Don't worry about us, ma'am," Buck said. "We've all slept in our cabs before, just need somewhere safe to park until this blows over." But Sarah was already thinking about Frank, who'd never turned away a driver in need. "Absolutely not. It's supposed to hit 20 below tonight. You'll freeze to death out there." As if responding to her decision, Katie Wilson, Sarah's 19-year-old part-time waitress, pushed through the door, covered in snow. "Mrs. Mitchell, I saw all the trucks and thought you might need help. I know you told me not to come in tonight, but—" "Katie, you shouldn't be out in this," Sarah said, but she was grateful for the extra hands. "My dad's 4WD truck made it through fine," Katie replied, already tying on her apron. "What do we need to do?" Sarah surveyed her unexpected situation. 12 stranded truckers, enough food for maybe half that many people, and a blizzard that showed no signs of stopping. But Frank's voice seemed to echo in her memory. "Every trucker's somebody's family. You treat them right, and they'll remember." "First thing, let's get everybody fed," Sarah announced. "Katie, start another pot of coffee. Buck, can you help me move some tables around so everyone has a place to sit?" As the truckers settled in, and Sarah began preparing what food she had available, she noticed the easy camaraderie that developed among the drivers. They shared road stories, compared routes, and talked about families they were trying to get home to. Despite being strangers an hour earlier, they quickly formed the kind of temporary community that Sarah remembered from the Roadhouse's busier days. Around 8:30 p.m., Just as Sarah was serving the last of her available food, the Roadhouse's ancient heating system made a grinding noise and fell silent. The temperature began dropping immediately. "Oh, hell," muttered one of the younger drivers. "That don't sound good." Buck stood up from his coffee. "Mind if I take a look at your furnace, ma'am? I used to work on heating systems before I started driving." Sarah led Buck to the basement, where he spent 20 minutes coaxing the old oil furnace back to life. "She'll hold through the night," he reported, "but you're going to need a new heating system soon." As the hours passed and the storm intensified outside, Sarah found herself sharing stories about Frank and the Roadhouse's history. The conversation naturally turned to the financial struggles that would likely close the business permanently within 2 weeks. "That for sale sign outside," Buck observed. "How long has that been up?" 8 months, Sarah admitted. "Bank's going to foreclose at the end of the month. Can't compete with the truck stops on the new route." An older driver named Earl Watson looked up from his coffee. "Frank Mitchell, was your husband by any chance an owner-operator before he opened this place?" Sarah nodded. "Drove for 15 years. Why?" Earl's weathered face broke into a slow smile. "Buck, you need to hear this. Frank Mitchell, this lady's husband, was Roadhouse Frank on the CB." Buck nearly dropped his coffee cup. "No way. You mean the Frank Mitchell who helped me fix my transmission outside Lexington about 12 years ago? Wouldn't take a dime for 3 hours of work." "That's him," Earl confirmed. "Frank was a legend on Channel 19. Must have talked hundreds of drivers through bad weather, mechanical problems, you name it. Always knew the best routes, cleanest restrooms, cheapest fuel." As the night progressed, more stories emerged about Frank's reputation among truckers. Sarah listened in amazement as she learned about aspects of her husband's life she'd never fully understood. Frank had apparently used the Roadhouse's CB radio to create an informal network of mutual assistance that extended across multiple states. "Your husband saved my life during an ice storm in '98, said Maria Santos, the young female driver. "Talked me through finding a safe place to park when I couldn't see 10 feet in front of my rig. Frank once drove 20 miles out of his way to bring me a fan belt when I broke down," added another driver. "Refused payment and told me to help the next guy who needed it." By midnight, Sarah had exhausted virtually all her food supplies, including provisions from her upstairs apartment. She refused payment from any of the truckers, telling them their company was worth more than money. The CB radio behind the counter crackled periodically, with reports from other drivers monitoring the storm's progress. Around 2 a.m., as the blizzard continued to rage outside, the conversation turned to the challenges facing independent truckers and small businesses like Sarah's Roadhouse. The drivers shared stories about corporate chains replacing family-owned truck stops, noting how the personal touch and genuine care were disappearing from the industry. "Places like this are what made trucking a community instead of just a job," Buck reflected. "Your husband understood that. He knew drivers needed more than just fuel and food. They needed someone who gave a damn." As dawn approached and the snow finally began to taper off, the truckers prepared to continue their journeys. The highway remained closed until noon, giving everyone additional time to share contact information and road stories. Sarah again refused payment for the food and shelter, considering it payback for all the times Frank helped drivers out there. The truckers insisted on leaving generous tips for Katie, who had worked all night without complaint. Buck was the last to leave, stopping to confirm details about the for sale sign and the impending foreclosure. "Both the Roadhouse and the apartment upstairs," Sarah confirmed. "End of the month, unless I can catch up 3 mortgage payments." Buck nodded thoughtfully. "Ma'am, you might be surprised what can happen when truckers put their minds to something." After the last truck pulled out of the parking lot, the Roadhouse felt emptier than ever. Sarah spent the next day serving only 2 customers and began the painful process of packing Frank's personal belongings including his CB radio and the hundreds of thank you cards he'd received from drivers over the years. 2 days later, as Sarah was boxing up Frank's old CB equipment, she heard the unmistakable sound of air brakes outside. Looking through the window, she saw Buck's Peterbilt pulling into the parking lot, followed by another truck, then another. Within 10 minutes, the parking lot was full, with more trucks lining the roadside as far as she could see. Buck entered the Roadhouse carrying a thick manila envelope, followed by a parade of truckers Sarah had never met. "Ma'am, we've been busy since we left here," Buck announced. "Spread the word on Channel 19, posted on every truckers forum on the internet." Turns out nearly every driver in 6 states has a Frank Mitchell story. What followed was an incredible display of community support that restored Sarah's faith in humanity. Driver after driver shared personal stories about how Frank had helped them over the years, providing mechanical assistance, weather guidance, emergency loans, and countless acts of kindness that had never been repaid. William Porter, regional manager for Porter Hall Trucking, stepped forward to announce that his company wanted to establish a regular schedule for their fleet to stop at the Roadhouse. "Our drivers need a place where they're treated like family instead of just customers," he explained. Other company representatives followed with similar commitments, recognizing the value of maintaining relationships with establishments that understood trucking culture. The envelope Buck handed Sarah contained cash donations from trucking companies, independent drivers, and people who had heard about her kindness during the blizzard. "Should be enough to catch up your mortgage and restock your supplies," Buck said quietly. "Frank's legacy deserves better than a foreclosure sign." An older driver named Chester returned Frank's CB radio handset, which Frank had given him years earlier during an emergency. "This should come back home," he said, and the handset fit perfectly with the base unit Sarah still maintained behind the counter. Kevin Miller, a young graphic designer who drove part-time, presented a new sign design, "Frank and Sarah's Trucker Haven." The gathered drivers approved unanimously, and several volunteered to install it. As word spread over the CB radio network, more truckers arrived throughout the day. Sarah instructed Katie to start more coffee and call for help. They were going to need additional staff to handle the sudden influx of customers. 6 months later, Frank and Sarah's Trucker Haven was nearly unrecognizable. The mortgage was paid in full. The parking lot had been expanded to accommodate 36 trucks, and a new trucker lounge with shower facilities had been added. Sarah's staff had grown from 2 to 9 employees, and the Roadhouse operated 24 hours a day to serve the steady stream of drivers who had made it a regular stop. The CB radio remained in its place of honor behind the counter, always monitored on Channel 19. Sarah had learned to use it effectively, sharing traffic updates and continuing Frank's tradition of helping drivers navigate challenges on the road. She regularly heard truckers sharing new Frank stories over the airwaves, ensuring his reputation continued to grow even after his death. On the 1-year anniversary of the blizzard, Sarah hung a new photograph showing her surrounded by dozens of truckers who had returned to celebrate. The accompanying plaque read, "Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's who shows up when the road gets rough." The Roadhouse had become legendary along the southeastern trucking routes, with new drivers stopping by because they'd heard about it from other truckers. Sarah felt Frank's presence stronger than ever, understanding that the highway department's route change had ultimately led her exactly where she needed to be. The transformation proved that Frank's 30-year investment in the trucking community had created something far more valuable than a business. It had built a family network that transcended individual relationships. When that family learned one of their own was in trouble, they responded with the same loyalty and generosity Frank had always shown them. Sarah kept the old "for sale" sign in her office as a reminder of how quickly circumstances can change when good people decide to act. The CB radio continued its constant chatter, carrying messages of assistance, friendship, and the enduring spirit of a community that refuses to let its members face the road alone. Frank would have been proud to see his Roadhouse not just surviving, but thriving, serving as proof that genuine relationships and authentic care never go out of style. In an industry increasingly dominated by corporate efficiency, Frank and Sarah's Trucker Haven remained a testament to the power of treating every customer like family and every act of kindness as an investment in something larger than profit margins. We hope you enjoyed today's story of love, life, and betrayals. For more free stories and entertainment from our channel, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe with notifications.